So welcome everyone to our time management webinar today. Probably you are here in the hope to make more of your time. So because of that, I think we'll wait just maybe one more minute till it's 10:01 and then we'll get started. It seems to be a lovely day outside, so we appreciate your taking the time to talk about time today. Welcome. And seeing that it's 10:01, we'll go ahead and get started. So we're talking about time management today. My name is Lisa Hansen. I'm the Director of TRIO and Tutoring at Blackhawk College. I will be leading the presentation today, and normally my sidekick is Heather Bjorgen, who's the Dean of Enrollment Management. She is being, I should say, her substitute for the day is Michael Gibson, who is, and keep me honest here, Michael, I'm
an adult admissions advisor.
There we go. That's exactly what I was going to say. So yay. So we will both be hosting you for today's session. Here is my contact information and Heather's contact information. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to us later. So for a brief overview of today, we are going to talk about time, goals and priorities, time stealers and helpers. I'm going to go through a summary and then allow time for some Q&A. So with time, everybody has 24 hours. It is that the one leveler. It doesn't matter who you are, the kind of job you have, where you come from, part of the world you are, everybody has 24 hours in a day, right? So everybody has exactly the same amount of time, although it seems like some people have more, some people have less. Truly, everybody has the same amount. So we're going to start you off with a poll today to talk about how you feel about your time. You feel like you have too much time, the right amount of time, too little time. Give you about 10 more seconds here. Alrighty, and not surprising because you're here today, most people feel like they had too little time and some felt like they have about the right amount of time. And that makes sense for why you're coming to Embrace a Time Management webinar, correct? So what we're going to do today is just provide a simple tool to look for those time opportunities and those time stealers. So the simple tool I'm going to load in your chat box. So if you scroll along either the bottom or the top of your Zoom screen, you should see kind of like a cartoon bubble, which is the chat box. And you're going to see that Michael has already put her information into that chat box. And I'm going to download, or I'm going to upload a file for you to download, which contains this simple tool. And that should be downloaded for everybody now, so you can grab that. Michael will also be sending out these tools later in an email, but just if you wanted to grab it now, feel free. So really what this tool is, and the reason why it's so simple is because it truly is just the 24 hours that everybody has 7 days of the week, right? So what you're going to do, you're going to mark down everything that you do in half-hour increments. So it's something that only takes you 5 minutes. You don't have to put that in there, right? But just try to get a general idea for what you're doing in half-hour increments for your week's worth of time. This does work best if it's a usual time for you. I realize we're in the middle of a pandemic, so it's kind of hard to think about something being usual time, but it works if you're not abnormally busy or abnormally free, right? So you're trying to gauge kind of in general what you do with your time. So after you've jotted down your 24 hours in those 7 days, you're going to look for the absolutes. So what are the absolutes? These are the things you absolutely have to do, right? So you have to go to work, or at least I have to go to work. If I do not show up, I will eventually get fired, correct? Go to class if you're a student, including study time. Your commute to work, class, whatever that might be. Grooming, so all of those hygiene things that we have to do. Sleeping, very essential in order to function properly. Caretaking, if you're somebody that takes care of a senior, children, pets, all the time that it actually takes to take care of that person or people or furry people. The cleaning and upkeep that you have to do to maintain your homestead, which a lot of people might say that, oh, that's something I can put off. But really what you're looking for is a maintenance piece so that you're able to effectively slate your time, right? Because if you hold off, you're going to have a lot more to do at the onset. Eating, very important that we keep our body sustained, including the prep that it takes. So that's also grocery shopping, as well as cooking the food or getting it in containers to take with you to work or to school. Then we're also going to look for those opportunities. So opportunities are those things that are not absolutes that we can move around, right? So things like binge watching Netflix, which a lot of people have been doing throughout the pandemic, watching TV, watching other movies, etc. Video games, playing video games, social media games. Candy Crush was a big one for a while for people. Social media browsing, so just scrolling through your Facebook feed, can be Pinterest, Instagram, Snapchat. Twitter is one that I did not include on here, but that can take up a lot of people's time. So anything where you're kind of spending hours on something where you could be inserting one of those absolutes in that category that does need to get done, right? So after you review what you're actually doing with your time, you're going to find those absolutes, you're going to find those areas of opportunity. You're going to create a weekly map. You're going to enter those absolutes first, and you need to look ahead for those upcoming due dates, right? So if you have a big presentation or something, you need to make sure that you're breaking it down into little pieces, or that you're able to meet those obligations so it doesn't surprise you and now you're not able to do those other important absolutes because you need to focus on that one. Schedule items into those areas of opportunity. So those times when you were binge watching for 3 hours, maybe you can cut that down to 1. Include better prepping. So are there things that you can do the night before, the day before, food planning, laying out clothes, other items, so that you can really be ready to hit the ground running that next day, right? So you're going to create that week plan, looking at everything that you have for that next week, and then you're going to execute that plan. So after you execute that plan, if it's not working, you need to redo it. You need to do that week-long test again, that simple tool, looking for those opportunities and stealers. And again, think about where you can restructure things, right? Think about 3 things. Are there things that you should stop? So you absolutely realize that you have some major time suckers in there, but you're continuing to kind of keep those bad habits going and you need to stop. Are there things you should start? So you're thinking, man, if I only did better food prep. So try to incorporate that. And then give yourself a pat on the back for those things that you feel like you should continue. So what are the things that you're like, yes, this is an area that I'm absolutely doing wonderfully with my time and I need to continue that, right? So after you've answered those 3 questions, you're going to make those tweaks into your weekly plan for the upcoming week. And then you're going to continue. And again, if it's not working, go back. It's truly a simple tool that just makes us aware of what we're doing with our time in order to better manage that time. Any questions about that?
Not seeing any currently.
All right. And I always take silence for none. So with that, we're going to move on to goals and priorities. So the biggest piece of setting goals is how to establish those. So you can think about it kind of 2 areas. It's typically asking up with your job that your boss is really the one that's going to set those goals with you. If it's a home area, then it's either your partner, your spouse. You can have a family meeting to figure out what those goals are, but you need to ask up or across, kind of depending on how you look at it. to figure out what is it that we need to get done here? What do we need to prioritize? After you've figured out what those are, either by asking your boss, having that family meeting, you're going to figure out what are the important functions associated with establishing those goals and then completing those goals. And those are the tasks that you need to schedule, right? So it's important to be intentional. You need to keep those goals in the forefront so that they don't just become an urgent piece that you're trying to just knock out quickly, right? It's really important that those goals stay something that you're focusing on so that you can make those little inroads to completing them. So I'm gonna load a fillable form that truly is just a flow chart. When you think about goals are usually like big picture, year-long kind of things, right? So this truly just takes goals that you can put into this fillable form from yearly to quarterly to monthly to weekly to daily, where you can actually schedule tasks on a calendar. That's usually a way that we end up completing something, is by breaking it into those manageable tasks, those things that we can actually do every day, right? Let me load that in the chat box for you now. All right, and that should be loaded in there for you. And again, Michael will send these out, but this is just something, if you want to grab it right now, you can absolutely do that. So as with the simple tool that we talked about with just slating our week-long time, this is also something where you want to set the time for that. You want to look at, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's that first quarter. Are you actually meeting the tasks that will equate to meeting those year-long goals? And if not, it's really important that you go back and start to make those tasks manageable so that you can make those goals happen. And maybe they're just not realistic, so you need to reassess them in general, but make sure that when you fill in this fillable doc, that if you notice you're not making any inroads, you need to reassess. Maybe it's, the goal wasn't something that really was important and now you're finding a new goal. But if you're really not making any progress, you have to figure out, why aren't you making any progress, and retread. Questions about that? Hearing none. So sometimes people find it easier to think about priorities or goals as far as the jar example. And the jar example's kind of been around for a long time. It's just a good visual for us to think about how to effectively make those goals happen. And you think about that everybody has 24 hours in a day, but the time passes no matter what you do with the time. If you're sitting around all day sleeping, that time will pass and you'll have slept, right? That's the thing that you'll have gotten done. So if you think about, with the jar example, which I'm going to load into chat really quick for you, your third tool from today's presentation, and that has been loaded for you now. It's really important that you put those big rocks, those big picture goals in there first, your highest priority items, right? Because if you don't put the big rocks in first, they're not going to fit in after you've put all those kind of urgent but not important things in there, right? So the big rocks are going to be those goals that you defined with your boss, or if it was a house perspective with your spouse having that family meeting. These are the important but not urgent tasks. So they're important, meaning that you've decided that this is something that needs to happen, but it's not urgent, it's not an emergency, right? And so if you don't keep that intentional focus on it, it's something that won't happen, which is why it's important that you make the time and schedule those tasks first. The smaller pebbles, which will fit in after the big rocks, as long as you put those in first, are the urgent and important tasks. So this is something that's more immediate. It's going to be outside of those big picture goals. So if you think about the 80-20 Pareto principle, it's where about 20% of the work actually meets 80% of that goal, right? So you want to make sure that you're focusing on the big picture, but realizing that you're going to have these smaller pebbles that will fill in. These are good delegating items. So if you have someone that you're able to delegate to, if you have staff, if you have an assistant, something like that, in a family situation, if you have others that can help support you, these are good delegating items because they are important, but they're not leading to those big picture items, right? Next, we have our sand. So we've got the big rocks in there, we've got those pebbles in there. Now we have sand. So it's urgent, but not important. These are those things that can fill up our entire day quickly if we're not really intentional and focused. So these are those maintenance tasks. We all know you get in, you've got an entire inbox full of emails. You could probably check emails, return voicemails, file sort all day long, but it would mean you didn't get anything else done, right? So sand are those urgents because they're right in your face, but not important tasks. A good way to look at this is if ever 10 minutes shows up on your schedule, do these, because these are those maintenance things. They need to get done, but we could literally spend all day and then not get those big rock or smaller pebbles done, right? Water, which is what's left over after we have our big rocks, our pebbles, and our sand in there, is small but vital. It's planning so we can be intentional. It's making sure that we're setting the time to know that we're focusing on those big rock items. It's downtime so we can come back refreshed and able to be creative and focused. It's really important to do that at the beginning and the end of the day so you can see what you've done in order to assess if you need to do things differently that next day. And if we don't allow this water, this intentional focus, this planning, this refresh, it will be filled, this additional time will be filled with air, which are those time wasters or those urgent items, right? And we all know what happens if we don't have water. So it's really vital that we're taking the time for this, but it can be replaced easily with that air, those time wasters or those urgents. Any questions about that, the jar example? Hearing none. So now we're going to talk about something that's kind of tricky. This is a hard one for me. Perfection versus good enough. When to just say, I have done this project good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. First of all, perfection doesn't exist, right? But it's hard to sell that to ourselves. So something that I'm going to try to talk about in order to help you be good enough and not try to for perfection is return on investment. So when you sit down and you have those goals, conversations with your boss, or you have that family meeting, usually there's some sort of return on investment as part of setting that expectation and that goal. And the return on investment really means this is a goal based on this amount of time, this amount of focus, this amount of energy and resources going into this project. So perfection means you've worked on it kind of over and above where it needs to be in order to meet the expectation, right? So it also means that you devalued that project because the return on investment is now out of whack, meaning more time, more effort, more resources have gone into it than what that expectation was. So to allow yourself good enough, you just have to think, did I meet the expectation for this project? If you have met that expectation, it's good enough, you're done. You can move on to that next thing. You can refocus onto those other things on your plate because we all have a bunch of things on our plate. So when you think about balancing all those priorities, everything on your plate, it should help you with good enough. Does that make sense to everybody? Helps in some way? Any questions about that?
I think this can be one of the hardest ones to do because most of us want to be seen as doing quality work, and that push towards perfection oftentimes is what gets seen as quality work. And so where is that line, you know, and being able to kind of negotiate that with those around you or with your supervisor, I think can be an interesting line sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you bring up a really good point too, is just borrowing a colleague to look at it to kind of rein you in on good enough. Because if they think it looks nice, you know, you can just say, oh, okay, they think it looks nice. And you have that kind of affirmation.
Barb also says, but my expectations might not be what others' expectations are. And how do you define kind of what that difference is?
I think it's going back to the person who's defined expectations. So if you're the one looking for that, you have to make sure you've met what your boss wants So you just say, hey, here's what I've come up with. Is this what you were looking for? If they say yes, you're good. Does that help?
I'm going to
Yes,
say,
it does.
oh,
Yes, it does.
Thanks, Barb.
Thank you.
So now we're going to talk about SMART goals. This has also been out there for a long time, but it's just a good way to kind of keep thinking about even the good enough kind of concept, right? This is setting those expectations, which is kind of the perfect segue for our question before too, because SMART goals really helps you to know the specifics for what's required of that project or what that goal is. So the specific is that you need to know exactly what it is in order how to complete it, right? Measurable is that proof that you're making progress. So how do you know that you're on task? Do you have 15% of it done, 25% of it done? What does that look like? And sometimes you have to reevaluate. Going back to looking at the yearly, quarterly, monthly, weekly progress, if you're not sure that you're making any inroads, you need to probably reevaluate to figure out how you can make it measurable to know that you're making progress. And if you're not sure how to do that, that's when you can go back to your boss or have that next family meeting to discuss how will we know that we're making the progress we want to. It needs to be attainable. So can you reasonably accomplish your goal? And sometimes that comes down to money, right? Is it in budget? If it starts to become out of budget, then it's a good conversation to have with your boss or that family meeting. Like, this is above where we thought it was going to be. That happens often with projects. You get in there and you decide there's more resources, time, money needed. Is it relevant? So does it directly align with those goals that you've developed with your boss or from a house perspective in that family meeting? It should match the organization's values and long-term objectives, directly relate somewhere in there. And it needs to be time-based. So you do know you have that realistic deadline, but you also need it to be somewhat urgent so that it forces you to make progress. We all know that if you have, I'm going to dramatize it a little bit. So if you have 100 projects to get done, often you get done 110. If you have one to get done, I can wait till tomorrow. So just make sure that you're providing kind of that urgency or that motivational piece so that you know you're making progress too. A good kind of little tip is to try for a 15% up goal. So what that means is if you've given yourself all day to complete something like an 8-hour day, can you shave off like an hour and 15 minutes? That would be that 15% up goal and can just create a little motivation or a little like kickstart to that project. Questions about SMART goals?
one of the other tricks I've learned along the way, particularly when you're working in teams or groups, whether it's a family or whatever, is that you also need to identify who's responsible for getting it done. Because if you don't, it's always the other person.
Very good point. Yeah, that accountability is really big. At the end of the day, who's bringing this forward? So we've been talking about tasks since we talked about goals and breaking it down into, sand and water and all of those pieces. But thinking about that daily planning really is those manageable tasks, the actual action items associated with meeting the goals, right? So one of the most important things to do is to realize that we only make time for the things that we schedule time for. So if it is something that you want to get done, you need to schedule the time for that. So only fill, this is another one of those lovely tips, only fill 85% of your calendar. Why do you do that? How many times do you come to work and there's already stuff on your desk, or there's something in your inbox, or there's a phone call that will take up roughly 15% of your day, right? So if you fill 8 hours of your day, if you have an 8-hour day, you're not going to get everything done. So this allows you the push for those need to do items that show up unexpectedly. It allows for you to feel like you can still make that progress because you've allowed yourself that cushion for those items that just show up. So building in the time to meet those end goals, thinking about what should be included in all of those things. Think about the time that it'll take to receive and then make adjustments for other people's input. Usually we work for an organization where at least other people need to have some sort of say into what the project's going to be or look like. So think about how long is it going to take for me to put out this communication, get it back, and then make those adjustments as part of this project. What sort of research is going to be needed? How much time is that going to take? Make sure you get that on your calendar. What supplies are going to be needed? Is it going to take time to order those, get those back in, set those up? Is there going to be prep time or setup time needed in between sessions or projects? So just making sure that you do schedule all those little items, because if not, now those items would take up that 15%, and then you're not going to get those need to do items done, or it's going to delay those goal items, right? Questions about that? Hearing none. So I know I'm really locking this in, but truly, if you're gonna make the time, you gotta schedule the time, right? So we're gonna do our second poll, which is just kind of our comfortability for priorities and deadlines. So when you sit down for a meal, do you typically eat your veggies first? So what we're looking for here is really, do you knock out the thing you like the least, or do you eat your dessert first, the thing you like the most? So thinking about when you go to tackle something, do you tend to tackle the thing that you like the least or thing that you like the most? So we're going to give you a few seconds to answer this question in the poll. We have about 10 more seconds here. All right, so it looks like most people like to eat their dessert first, the thing they like the most. And some like to tackle the thing that they like the least, right? So that there's not a right or wrong with how you approach this. It's just realizing your comfortability for those deadlines and those tasks. So if you're somebody that likes to tackle the thing that you like the most first, you're going to want to make sure that you build in ample time at the tail end closer to your deadline of a project, because you're going to save those difficult tasks for the end. If you're somebody that tackles the difficult things first, you're going to need to schedule time heavy on the beginning part of the project, because you're going to handle those difficult tasks first and the easier things toward the end. You want to also make sure that you're scheduling those really difficult tasks when you're on. And what I mean by that is, think about your day. We all have those kind of lull times where you're just not as on, you're not as focused, it's harder to stay in the game, right? So think about when you wake up and you get to work, are you somebody that just pounds out work right away? Do you kind of have to wake up slowly, get a few cups of coffee? Or is it afternoon that you're on? Or in the afternoon after you've had lunch, are you more in kind of siesta mode, right? Or is it that you're a night owl? You're just absolutely on and, you know, the sun's gone down and you're tackling that work? Or are you sleepy by the time the sun goes down? So think about how you face your time. If you're on during certain times, that's when you want to clear your calendar for those difficult tasks. It's going to be easier for you to stay focused and really hit those hard, crunch through those most difficult tasks when you're the most on. So a lot of this has to do with just self-reflection and thinking about your own comfortability, the way that you operate, and scheduling around that. So once those goals are broken down into tasks and you get those scheduled into your calendar, your app, your planner, whatever that is, keep an eye on the time that you've estimated for those tasks. If you're over or you're under, first of all, think about why. Am I over because I really wasn't working on those tasks? I was kind of off in dreamland. So maybe it's because I didn't schedule them at a time that I'm on. Or if I'm under, did I give myself too much push? I wasn't allowing for that urgency, that motivation for that 15% off, right? Make those adjustments so that now you can manage your time better. So again, You only do what you schedule the time for. And my best example for that is, how often have you said to friends, yeah, we should do lunch? And then the next time you see them, you say, hey, we should do lunch. And then the next time you see them, you say, hey, we should do lunch. But if you say, hey, we should do lunch August 4th at noon, you're probably going to do that. Well, at August 4th at noon at a specific restaurant, you're probably going to do that. So we make the time for the things we schedule time for. Any questions about that? Or insights you have? Anything you want to offer?
It's also easier to reschedule something than never had to have scheduled it in the first place. Oftentimes I'll schedule things that I'm not entirely sure that I have time for, because with the kind of caveat that if things come up, we can move this, but let's get it on the calendar.
Absolutely. That's a great point. So just get it on the calendar. You can reschedule if you need to, but get it on the calendar. So speaking of getting it on the calendar, we're going to talk about planners and things. So it is important, as we talk about scheduling things, that you do have a calendar or an app or a planner that works for you, right? So you can have the good old hard copy planner. The only thing that I would really highlight there is that use a pencil, so that when you make changes, you can easily do that and you're not crossing out and sending arrows along everywhere. But hard copy planners work really well, and you can take them with you. There's a lot of virtual calendars out there. A lot are associated with email addresses, especially if it's your organization. So if you use Outlook or Google, there's a calendar associated with those to easily have meetings and things. There's plenty of apps out there that you can use too that work on smartphones. I just listed some here: AnyDo, TimeTree, 24Me. Cozy is a family app where if you have lots of different people with various calendars that you're trying to balance, that can be a good one. And most, not only apps, but virtual calendars do have notifications built right into them. So you can say, you know, boy, this is something where I'm going to need to know about it 2 weeks before, so I can start making those inroads and scheduling time on my calendar for little bits and pieces, right? Or it's really important that I realize that next week is picture day, so that we already have an outfit and all that kind of stuff. So as you go to schedule it, it's important that you also think about what's the notification time that I need to start thinking about this, right? And I know something that I do too on my calendar. I like to, I have kind of an urgent color coding system. So when I first have a task, I put it in yellow because it's far out from the deadline, and I can move it if one of those really important things lands on my desk that I need to knock out quickly. As it gets closer to the deadline, I move that color to orange. So it's like, okay, this is starting to become much more important, right? And then when it's within, I know I have to work on it, I cannot move it anymore in order to meet that deadline, I make it red. That way, this is something that I absolutely have to take the time for, and I cannot move it anymore. So that's something just really helpful for me, if that's anything that you think would help you. I've seen other people do it for different, if they're in like different groups or different not organizations, but working on different committees, that maybe each committee is a different color, or students where each class is a different color, to kind of separate that way. So you'll kind of find a system that works for you. And again, a lot of that is just reflection on you knowing you and what works best for you. You do have to embrace what you will actually do with that planner, app, or calendar. The information does need to be input by you. So I've seen a lot where there's really fancy bells and whistles and things. But if you don't know how to use them effectively, and you're not sure you even have the time because you're already so busy to effectively learn how to use them, you might need to think about, is this really something I'm going to use versus the thing that I already know how to use? Now, for some people, they think, if I just learn these bells and whistles, this will save my life. So then, yeah, you schedule the time to learn those bells and whistles, and then it will be a helpful thing for you. So really thinking about function versus that aesthetic, that pretty appeal, right? Because you want it to be functional to really help you, not be a hindrance. Any questions about planners or apps or calendars, or just things you want to share about what's worked for you? Hearing none. So we're going to move on to time stealers and time helpers. So I have my little time stealer guy right there. He reminds me a little bit of the Hamburglar from McDonald's. Procrastination is a big time stealer for people. Usually when you think about procrastination, it's because we're unsure of something. It might be how to do the project, when I'm supposed to start working or when it needs to be done, why I'm doing the project. Sometimes it's just the background for why I'm doing this or who needs to be involved, right? So there's some sort of uncertainty that's just keeping us from starting on the project. So if that's something that you notice is that you just have this uncertainty, make sure you're circling back to your boss, if that's who provided this project for you, to again, have that conversation about expectations so you can get those questions answered and feel like now you can power through it. Sometimes it's just that feeling of loss of control, right? Which also equates to stress. Stress can be a horrid procrastinator for us because it bogs us down, takes over kind of our brain power, and then we're not able to focus on the tasks at hand to get the thing done. Not accurate planning or scheduling of time is a huge one too. Again, if you filled your calendar those full 8 hours and didn't give yourself that push, you're gonna have those things that pop on your plate, and now you're not able to focus on this other thing that needs to get done. So making sure that you're really having those conversations to establish that, breaking down that, those into tasks, manageable tasks. And if you've had a bad experience, so let's say every time you've had a deadline or the past few times you've had a deadline, you haven't met that deadline, you need to break it into much smaller tasks. And every time you hit the deadline for one of those tasks, reward yourself. This is going to give you a positive experience for deadlines instead of that kind of anxiety and that stress feeling, because that anxiety and that stress is going to bog you down so that it's harder for you to focus and work on that project. So try to get it down into really small tasks. It can be, I wrote 1 sentence on the project. Reward yourself for that so you can replace those negative thoughts with positive thoughts to really bolster that positivity associated with deadlines to help you moving forward. If you feel yourself turning back into the negative again, go back, make those small tasks again, reward yourself until you feel that positive again. It's going to be an important behavior change for you. And circle back to thinking about those expectations and having all those questions answered anytime you're feeling stress. Feel free to tap in a colleague, your boss, whoever it might be, to just make sure that you're meeting all those questions so you can really focus on that project. Questions about procrastination?
So Julie shared that something that works for her is her keeping her planner open. That way when she walks by, she can get a glance at her day or her week. And if something comes to mind, she can add it. Sorry, Julia, not Julie. But yeah, so that kind of having it front and center kind of piece.
I love that because it keeps it in the forefront to allow that focus. And then to your point, if it's open, it's easy to add those additional pieces or make notes on there too. That's a great point. Anyone else, anything you want to add before we move on? Hearing none. So our next one is saying yes and saying no. So there's kind of 2 things in there. Learning to say yes is delegating, because yes means that you are saying yes to the 4-letter word help, which can be one of the most difficult words for us to use. Saying no is a really difficult one because we feel like in some way, shape, or form that that's failure. So right now we're going to take a poll regarding our ability to say no. So how do we feel about saying no? Overall, do we feel like we say no, we need to say no more often? Do we feel like we need to say, or that we say no when we should? Or do we need to say no less often? I'm going to give you a few seconds to answer the poll here. About 10 more seconds I'll give you. All right, so the good news is people feel like they say no when they should. So that's actually a great thing, because that's usually a really tricky thing for people. I am curious if you think you say yes when you should as well, because they're kind of opposite ends of the spectrum, but almost the same thing too. In theory, saying no means that you're saying yes to help, right? So going to our saying yes, yes also means delegating. So when we go back to those small pebble items that are things that are urgent, but not necessarily leading to our goals, where I said that those are good delegating tasks. Saying yes can also mean that you're delegating. And a good way to kind of take some guilt off or to allow you to let other people help is to realize that the organization has everybody out there. And if your plate is really full, it might mean that everybody else's plate is full, but it might mean that somebody else does have the time to effectively take on that project and give it the time and effort that it needs. So we want things to be done well. So if you already feel like your plate is really full, it could be that handing it to somebody else means that now you're able to best focus and complete that project, do your due diligence with it. And now somebody else is able to effectively do that with this new item that's come up. So you're really spreading those resources across the organization, which also means better return on investment for the organization, which is good. Because at the end of the day, we all want to have everything, be in a good balance, right? So learning to say no means that you're able to accept that you're full up, you're helping the organization by allowing other people to focus on something. And it also means that you're able to say, hey, I want to do well on these existing projects and priorities that I have. So I'm going to either allow someone else to do it, or I will certainly take this on, but then somebody else needs to take this other project so that I can effectively do and provide the focus for this one. So that's the keeping nice with the and is saying, absolutely, I would love to do that. And I want to make sure this project gets done. So what can come off of my plate, or can I pass this on to somebody else? So then it doesn't seem as much of a negative by just saying no, but you're saying and providing the reasons behind that, right? Questions about that?
Barb brought up the point that many of us don't treat those things the same between home and work, that we might be really good in one, but not in another.
Yeah, I think the work-home balance can be really tricky, especially if it's, there's a deadline that's approaching, can kind of pull us out of whack. So it's important that we're thinking about it in both areas of our life, not just one or the other, but it's balance overall. Sometimes if we're too focused on work, that kind of knocks us off balance for home, and then we get the stress and the guilt at home that then kind of ekes over into our stress at work, right? So balance overall is good. So we think about, to set those expectations, we have those conversations with our boss. So in delegating, it really is the same thing. It might be that your boss handed you that project because they feel you have the skill set that's needed to complete that project effectively. So you really do want to have those conversations with them. And then if they say it's okay, that they really just want the project done, they don't really care if it's you or your staff or whomever that does it, then that's the perfect item to delegate, right? But it's important if you're delegating that you also provide the answers to all those questions so that that person can effectively complete it. They know kind of the SMART goals aspect. They've answered those who, why, when, where questions for that project so that they can do the good enough, right? They realize what you're wanting. You want to ask for feedback to make sure that they heard you correctly. They really do know what's expected for that project. And then you want to set check-in times so that they're not just feeling that they're out there an island unto themselves, but that, okay, I'm going to check back with you in a week. Let me know if you have any questions in the meantime, yada, yada, so that you kind of have that flow of conversation and they don't feel like they're just left. You do have to let it go though. Once you've given up that project and you've decided you're delegating it, it also means that it is theirs. Even if it's outside of the vision that you had for the project, as long as they're meeting those expectations that you outlined, it is good enough. And it might be done differently than you expected, but it's different, not wrong. This is also a great way to let your people know that you trust them, you're developing them, you're helping them with new skills, which also helps the organization. Because the next time a project comes up that requires the same skill set, now you have additional people that can work on that project. And it's a resume builder for your people. And it again allows you to have that intentional focus on those other items that you need to be working on. Questions about delegation?
Not seeing anything at this point.
All righty. Now we're going to move to interruptions, another time stealer. So it's really important that we talk about defining interruptions. The two examples that I'm going to provide, the person was talking about that, oh, good gravy, she's just hit with phone calls all day long and people coming to her desk and asking questions all day long. So it's just interruptions, interruptions. She never gets anything done because she was the receptionist. So her job was to triage phone calls and to triage those questions coming in, right? So it really wasn't an interruption, it was her job. Your boss also is not an interruption, although if the boss keeps coming and just chit-chatting or whatever, it might be that you can find some very tactful ways to create short meetings established so that you can work on your projects. But your boss giving you another project isn't an interruption, they're just your boss. So people interruptions, the most important thing is to establish healthy boundaries. So a lot of times what we do is somebody comes in and they interrupt you and we want to be nice. So we just kind of do the, oh, let's answer the question really quick and not just talk about, you know, the importance of setting those healthy boundaries by saying, I'd like to help you. I also need to work on this. So let me connect or let me get that question to you at 1 o'clock, right? So they come in again because you've already answered their question. They come in again, they have another question, we answer it real quick again, but maybe this time we do the, because we're trying, we think we're letting them know that they're effectively stealing our time. But really what's happened is they've gotten their question answered twice now, right? Third time they come in and they interrupt again, they ask another question, and we blow up because, oh my gosh, they've interrupted now all this time, etc. So what now we've come off as is gruff or aggressive or whatever, volatile, where if the first time they had come in, we had created that healthy boundary by saying, I would really love to help you with that. And I also need to get this done. So why don't I connect with you at 1 o'clock and then we can hash through any questions you have, right? So you're really creating some positive rapport here because now they know that you're busy. They know that you're going to create that time for them, but they're not going to continue to invade your office. And so you're going to have a much more positive colleague or organizational relationship with that person because you've set that healthy boundary versus that negative reinforcement of the eye rolling or the when they come in, because they are still getting their question answered, even though you feel like you're showing them that it's not an okay thing to do, right? So multitasking is also an interruption. If you have that phone call that comes in or your notification on your personal cell phone, whatever it might be that takes you away from your focus on your project, it actually does take your brain time then to refocus, get back on track with what you were doing before. And trying to concentrate on 2 things at once, they actually say make sure IQ fall 10 points. So think about that sometimes. So anytime that you can keep focused on the one thing and try to keep those distractions at bay is going to help you. And you're going to not have that rework of trying to get back into your groove and your focus for that project that you were working on. So some things you can do, turn off your personal cell phone or have it put away in a drawer or something like that, and just check it during breaks because you're going to allow yourself that water time, right? To check your things and just refresh. You can schedule short weekly meetings, again, with like those interrupters or whoever that might be, to establish rules about question and answer. If somebody walks in, you can do a few things. You can use that and concept, which is, yeah, I would love to help you and I need to get this done, so let's try to connect at this time. You can stand up because that usually is a good indicator that you were just about to move on to something else. So often then people try to quickly, hurry up with whatever they were going to ask. Or if the standing up doesn't work, you can say, hey, walk with me. So now you can effectively walk them back to their workspace and then get back to yours and refocus. Those are just some kind of tips and tricks on those walk-in things. If it's okay with your organization and your boss, you can have open office times if it is something where you do need to allow people to come in and ask questions. You can have set times that you check your email so you can focus on those key projects, especially if you're trying to work on a particular deadline for a big report or something, and times that you're going to check your phone. Again, those would have to be things that your organization is okay with, your boss is okay with, but especially if you're working on a key project for the organization that really has a hard, fast deadline, these are things that can help you to allow that focus and not that multitasking or rework of getting back on track. And you can have a do not disturb sign on your door if, again, it's allowed by your organization and your boss and you're really having to hash something out for a key project. Questions on any of those tips, tricks, or anything people want to offer as something they've tried that's worked for them? Hearing none. So then a key piece, of course, is staying healthy. So this kind of brings us back to our absolutes in that simple tool for our weekly plan, that's self-care, right? It's really important that we are the foundation of everything that we do. Our bodies are the foundation for everything that we do. So self-care is vital, and that is often one of those items that gets thrown out the window when we get busy. We need to make sure that we're sleeping effectively. There's so much research on what sleep does for our brain and being able to function effectively. Ask any newborn mom, right? Oh my goodness, lack of sleep just is awful on our brain and how we function. Eating, and not just eating, not just that we ran somewhere and got food, but are we eating the things that sustain our body well for what we need to do? Thinking about your activity level, are you getting a balanced diet to really sustain your body for what you're expecting of it? Amid that, are you getting enough water? Are you staying hydrated enough? Are you exercising? They say sitting is the new smoking, right? So are you getting up often enough to allow that blood to flow, to just get your brain moving again, and then sitting back down? Just taking quick walks throughout the day can do wonders. Are you allowing for those breaks, that rest in between, to come back refreshed and allow for that creativity, those bits of downtime? An example that I love to provide is that I was working on an Excel spreadsheet and I had crunched this calculation. And in Excel, you know, it's pretty much auto sum, right? So I had done it like 3 to 5 times, gotten a different number every single time. And I thought, oh, this is nuts. So I walked away, just rehashed a little bit, took a quick walk, came back, crunched the numbers 3 times, got the exact same answer 3 times. I just had been sitting for too long, focusing for too long, and my brain was overloaded. The minute that I took a break and redid it, it worked for me. So that's a great example for how just taking a few minutes can allow for that downtime, that refresh, so that you're able to focus effectively, right? So you have to be on the lookout and really be able to self-assess for those key things. Because all of these things equate to our best function focus, which is really foundational for our time management in general. Any questions about staying healthy and self-care, or just tips and tricks that you found work for you? Hearing none. So a summary of what we've kind of covered today then is being aware of our time, being aware of our comfortability with time. That's that tackling things first versus the difficult things first versus later. When we're on our best times that we function, knowing our goals and continuing to have conversations if we're not sure, if there's any uncertainty built in there, which can lead to that stress and procrastination. Making those goals into SMART goals so that we know the specifics, we know they're attainable, we can assess progress. Breaking those goals into those action items, which are tasks that we actually schedule onto our calendar because we make the time to make sure we're getting them done. Using those time stealers and time helper strategies We can keep interruptions at bay, stay focused, and be most effective with our use of time. And making sure our foundation, our body, that we are healthy. With that, we're going to pull up our last poll for our session today. So after attending today's presentation, I feel that I have learned a few time management tools I can use. I've learned at least one time management tool that I can use. Have not learned anything new. I'll give you about 10 seconds to answer the poll. All righty, a couple more seconds. All right, we will close out the poll here. And it looks like most of you noted that you learned at least a few time management tools that you can use, and some have learned at least one. So that's awesome, because again, you're probably here because time is something that you're trying to work on and be better with. So we appreciate that. So again, if anyone has any questions, you can load those in the chat or unmute your mic. You are able to go to bhc.edu/go to register for any other upcoming webinars that we have. As always, you can like us on Facebook and keep connected with us that way to see what we have up and coming. Give you a few seconds here to see if anybody has any questions or anything they want to throw out there. All right, hearing none, I'm just going to load my and Heather's information one more time. That way, if you do think of something at 2 a.m., which is typically where my brain goes, you can shoot those to us and we can seek out those answers for you. Otherwise, thank you so much for attending today. And I will let you get 3 minutes back on your calendar that you can do those maintenance activities with, right? Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.